Good evening, everybody. Welcome back for another edition of Reasonable Doubt, brought to you by the Harris County Criminal Lawyers Association. I'm your host, Jimmy ARDOIN. We've been off for, what, the last 3 weeks here, Julio? What's going on?
Has it been that long?
I don't know. It's been a while.
I think we still talk about the show every week. It's just whether or not it's going to come on.
It's been about 3 weeks. We still text and figure out, are we going to actually come this week? Are we going to do it? Can we actually fit it in our schedules?
You know, it's a lot of work, but for you guys, we're here.
We are here, and we're competing with the Rockets tonight.
Well, you know, it's difficult to compete with the beard, but with these two wonderful attorneys, I'll go up any day.
Our guest this evening, ladies and gentlemen, Ann Johnson.
Hi.
Welcome to the program.
Hey, Jimmy.
You're going to have to speak up a little bit.
Thanks for being here. It is a tough night with the Rockets. Hopefully they're winning this hour, so we'll send them our good vibes and good luck.
Well, they're probably only 1 minute into the game, so
they could still be winning.
They could be 2-0 or something.
That's right. Let's do it.
And her law partner, Anna Martinez. Anna.
Hey guys, thanks for having us.
Oh, thanks for coming on. We appreciate it. Johnson Martinez, the firm. We've got the entire firm here. Is there anybody else back at the ranch that we need to?
No, this is it.
This is it.
You got the entire firm.
From stem to stern.
That's right. We send the faxes, we do the emails, we do everything.
Sounds like my life. Sounds like mine.
So I have to ask, did any of y'all get ordered to leave your parents' home this week?
No.
How about that? Who stays in home and lets their parents assume to kick them out of the house?
Well, I know Anna is still living at home with her parents. And no.
Well, my husband lived with my mom for a year actually after we were married. So, you know, we're traditional and we just, you know, you don't leave your house until you just need to leave your house. And sometimes you just need some help. So.
I was ready to get the hell out of my parents' house. Not going to lie.
Well, I'm trying to convince my wife to let my mom come in and live. She's getting old, you know, she needs a little bit more.
It's a built-in baby.
And she's willingly doing it and such. Lovely.
Well, we're going to be with y'all for the next hour, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about a number of issues with Ann and Anna about their specialty. They do criminal defense, and they also help victims of human trafficking. So they're going to educate us, especially me and Julio, because other than defending the occasional human trafficking case, we really we could use their education. I'm sure you could too. They got a lot of stuff to talk about. They also have a criminal defense practice, so we're going to talk about a few other issues. But if you want to get in on our conversation, we're going to open up the phone line. 713-807-1794 is the number. We'll open up the phone lines about 8:30 or so. We also have Twitter up at HCCLA. Why are you getting him a shot?
I was going to tell him we had to change the date. I don't know if we changed the date on the card.
Well, we also changed the cameras around. Now you're flicking your hands up in the thing while I'm trying to tell them. You guys need to hit up Twitter at HCCLA_TV, and you can get in that way as well. But let's start, guys. I want to talk about this reopening of the Criminal Justice Center. It's been a big topic here. Everybody's going to, you know, we're hustling back and forth between the Family Law Center, Civil Courthouse, and this makeshift jail docket over where is it? At 701 or 1201?
Both.
Both. So I've got them at both. And now we get word in 2 weeks we have a partial reopening of the Criminal Justice Center. How the hell is this going to work?
Well, we're going to show up on the day of. We're going to wait outside.
That's June 4th.
The elevators aren't going to work. And then we're going to have to go back to the jails. I think. Was the plan? No. What's the deal here?
That would be normal course, right?
I never thought, I will say that I missed that building, but I do miss the building and I'm excited and I think we should all be positive about it and hopefully the elevators are working. I mean, they don't work at the Family Law Center either, so I think we could, you know, just deal with the elevator situation. My only concern is the holdovers only have, if I remember correctly, 4 windows.
That's true.
So if we have all of these people that we've been seeing, as much as we have complained about the rooms in 701 and then Little Baker, we still get several people at the same time, so we're able to talk to them. Now that we're only going to have a few windows, I don't know if that's going to slow down the process.
I'm also thinking you can only fit so many individuals into the holdover cell.
Yeah.
And if we're having multiple courts, a limited space, they cannot possibly think that putting in, you know, 3 times max capacity of that holdover cell is anywhere near safe or smart. But then again, we're dealing with Commissioner's Court, so.
Yeah, I think,
True.
it's been hard because we've been one in 5 different locations. Everybody's running their dockets at about the same time. And so as criminal defense attorneys, you're having to bounce from building to building and trying to be there. And you can't always be efficient with your time. Or if you get into a court and a judge has a line and you've got to meet with them and you've got to stand there for 45 minutes to an hour. And so it's been a significant strain on clients. It's been a significant strain on the court staff. You've had people working in condemned buildings. People have been repeatedly ill or sick. And, I think it's an unfortunate thing when Harvey came along. Unfortunately, we're low man on the totem pole. And people don't jump up and complain about indigent defendants not getting their day in court. And all we're doing is kicking the can down the road.
Yep.
We're hurting the people that are public servants on every side. And everybody in that building deserves health, safety, and their day in court.
Well, and you talk about people getting sick. I mean, this is a building that was flooded. I mean, it's not that long ago. Have they gone in and done mold tests? And I'm concerned. Frankly, I'm concerned about the air quality over there.
Yeah,
Not that the air quality at the jail is probably any better.
Or the Family Law Center.
Or the Family Law Center, but I mean, this was a building that took on a significant amount of water and had water.
3 times now.
Yes.
So, I mean, this is a chronic problem with this building. And
Well, and when Judge Carahan was here, he was telling us about the problems that they discovered right before the flood with the air conditioning, how the dust had built up in there. And they had all these huge piles of dust that every time apparently they kicked on the air conditioner, dust would blow in. I mean, talk about nobody gives a rip about what's going on at the Criminal Justice Center.
And I will say I'm a lifelong Houstonian, and I have an emotional attachment to the Astrodome.
Yeah.
And I love that they're going to do something with the Astrodome, but that's a piece of property, and you got people right now that you don't have a building that's sufficient. And I don't see people running up and down the stairs seeing what we're having to go through. And it's not just us, but it's the clients. And the clients deserve health and safety, and so do all the support staff, because they're the ones that get stuck at their desk from 8 to 5.
And what do you guys, I mean, both of you were former prosecutors. We haven't really had, I don't think we've had anybody on post-Harvey that's a prosecutor. We haven't been able to get anybody to come on. But, from y'all's perspective, what do you think this does to them? I mean, their whole world's been thrown upside down. They're officing in 6 different locations. Their whole schedule's thrown out of whack.
I think it's really one of the hardest times to be a prosecutor because you have a lot of the older, more experienced prosecutors left. So they don't have that many people to train them. We have a lot of new prosecutors. We have Harvey, so then we have all these displacement of buildings. And then now we're going paperless. So it's just a lot of change at the same time. So I feel that for prosecutors, it is hard for them to actually figure out what's going on with each case. It's hard for them to do the to-dos. I remember being a felony 3, you barely had any time to actually, after docket, go back to your office. You have 1,000 cases. You try to do all the rib calls, get offense reports, get the evidence requested. Now, not only they have to go back to your office, which is no longer next door, now they have to travel to their office, and I just don't think, I think we see it. Every time we go to court, none of the to-dos are done. I think it's out of their hands to actually be able to do that, and now I think that going paperless is a great thing in the long term, but right now, while we adjust that process, I think everyone is just,
Transition's tough.
Yeah, it is really tough.
Maybe we should just move everybody to the Astrodome.
You know what,
Just turn it into one giant courthouse and office for the
I always
DA's
thought,
office.
throw everybody in the convention center. You have a space, it's there, but I understand that hurts business and tourism. But, the criminal justice folks are on the low end of the totem pole. And at some point you're going to pay for this one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to pay for this in the long term because you're going to have all of these employees that in 15, 20 years have chronic illnesses that you're going to look back and say, you kept shoving people into condemned buildings where you kept getting waivers and you just kept not doing anything. And I do know from word on the street and passing people that work there and are not like us. I mean, we get to come and go, but those people that are there 8 to 5, they are worried about their safety and security.
Yeah.
And they're worried about whether or not the building has really been taken care of. And these people are living paycheck to paycheck. And to
Right.
add that on top of it, they deserve better.
Yeah, I mean, it's...
Well, especially if it comes down and they're knowing, like later on it comes out, did you know that it was hazardous, or did you know that this was a problem?
They clearly knew the Family Law Center was a problem.
Well, there's been an independent study done by whose name is, I really don't know the name, He put in his like little secret dudes going around testing the Family Law Center. Turns out, yeah, every one of our suspicions as far as air quality, mold, asbestos, and the whole works, all of it is all there. And we're just swimming in it
Every day.
every day.
But hey, at least we get our workout going up the stairs, right?
I'm thinking I've been hitting 10, 15,000 steps by noon.
I don't want to hit that in 102-degree weather.
Yeah.
So I am relieved we're not going to be walking 4 miles.
You're going to get legs looking like The Rock, Julio. I mean, you keep trudging up that thing.
Well, The Rock is going to get legs looking like mine. Okay. I mean, today was one of the first days. The morning, the afternoon kind of eased off, but this morning was absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
We're sitting there, and I'm sitting in a suit. I had to go short sleeves. I don't know if you can't tell, but short sleeves and a big neck so it can breathe. Because this is absurd. This stuff's out of control. How do you think all right, so trials, do we know how trials are going to be run on this new
Jail
court?
docket?
Right.
I know that we're having a meeting today because I was trying to reset a case today, and it was for July, after July something, and the coordinator in misdemeanor court told me we're having a meeting today and we're trying to decide, because I asked, right now each court has, misdemeanor court, they have a day in the jail. And he said, I think we're keeping the jail schedule the way it is, so I think they're just transitioning buildings, but I think everything else is.
So
I think it's gonna be the
theoretically,
same.
they could have jury trials back in the CJC for jail cases.
See, and I heard that the public cannot get there. And,
That's what I
but
heard,
that's
too.
the problem is, those of us that work there, we're public. So why can the public not go? Is it
Yeah.
because it's not healthy for the public? Is it because it's not safe for the public? Because I feel awfully public when I'm walking around.
Right. I mean, it's not. You're not private.
I'm not private.
You're
I
not-
am public.
Yeah, you are not a government employee right
No.
now. I mean, you are. I mean, this is just such a messed up deal. I don't even know.
And I think people are trying. And I know people are
Sure.
trying, and it's an unfortunate circumstance. But I just don't know how you don't expect this is going to happen again. And I think some people have been screaming about it, like Chris Tritico's been saying, hey, think about this long term. And we've gotten to the point where it's like, oh my God, we got to do something now. So let's just go back there. Well, we should have been working on this 9 months ago.
Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it's been 9 months. That's, it's not 2 months ago. It's
No, people have
9
birthed
months.
a child, literally.
Thank you.
in
Yes,
that time,
that was exactly my knowledge.
mean-
Like full term pregnancy.
Yeah.
We're 40 weeks here, like maybe 41, even 42.
I had a fellow colleague today said she's finally moving back into her house
Yeah.
from Harvey. Like, this is something that not only would, and it's affecting the greater Houston area also, and it's, all these things that should have been done pre-Harvey to protect all these things, yeah, it's coming back. Same thing on the CJC and the criminal justice system. If things, there needs to be a plan. From my understanding, there's no plan. It's just, let's just move back in, or let's do Band-Aids until the next Band-Aid.
It's almost like a shell game.
Right.
Like, hey, if we move you guys back over here, you'll forget about it for a few months.
Right.
And then we'll throw you back
Yeah.
over here.
Yeah. Look
And-
over here,
yeah.
not over
Look-
here at the problem.
I hear that they're a demo in the old DA building, the old one
The
right
old
next
one
to
right next
the
to it?
Family Law Center.
Yeah.
So if you go by there and you see they're starting to wall it off and hollow it out. What they're going to build there, I don't know.
Not a new criminal court.
Right, not
that's
a
for
new
sure.
criminal courthouse.
Tell you that. That would be the smart location to just,
Yeah.
build it up a little bit. It's not going to flood, but
Females,
be it
though.
from
What
us.
about female? The female holdover cells at the CJC are tiny.
They're
They're
terrible.
just one window.
yeah, one window.
that's right.
And so-
Even then, even before Harvey, all the women got, like the last reset, the last time that anyone can talk to them, because it's just one window.
Not only that, the way the building is designed, they cannot be brought over to the jail until all the males go through. And so that's why when you have a female defendant, they often are not even brought out until 10, 10:15.
Right.
And at that point, you may have 4 or 5 lawyers that are trying to talk to somebody at the window. And it's really hard to give somebody their day in court when you've got, minutes to try to deal with a felony matter or whatever else and help a female defendant. So whenever they built that building, I don't think they thought females committed crimes. And again,
Well, and I heard a story about, I don't know where the trial was taking place, whether it was in the civil building or in the family law building, but essentially that a jury panel overheard a defense attorney talking about the entire strategy of the case with his client before they went in and picked the jury.
I wonder what the outcome was on that. Right.
I don't
know. I think
know,
they
but
sat the
I-
people from the
Yeah,
the
but I
panel.
mean, I've always said that that's the whole problem with our system is having everybody come down there so many times and forcing basically attorneys to meet with their clients even when they're not in the holdover cell, just to have to talk to them out in the hallway and there's so much going on. I mean, that's just not a conducive environment for talking to your clients, especially about these kind of matters. It's a terrible system. It's only been exacerbated by the situation we find ourselves in now. I mean, it's just messed up. But enough about that. Let's move on to what these two ladies do. You guys have a kind of a niche practice. Aside from your criminal defense practice, you help victims of human trafficking recover damages. So tell us a little bit about that.
We try to. So I'll tell you for
Start
me,
at 30,000 feet, and we're going to work our way down.
We're going to work our way down. So I'll say if you had told me 15 years ago that I'd be talking about human trafficking, I would say, you're nuts. I don't even know what that is. And for me, more than 10 years ago, I got appointed to represent a 13-year-old girl charged with prostitution. I was a juvenile defense attorney at the time, along with Mike Chorkey, took the case to the Texas Supreme Court, and it was a case of first impression, so first time in the nation anybody had looked at the issue of whether or not a child could be convicted for prostitution, given that it's a consent-based crime. And fortunately, the Texas Supreme Court agreed with the child and said, yeah, stop doing this. Stop prosecuting the child and go after those that are potentially exploiting the child. And so that started me down this new path of trying to advocate for victims of human trafficking, just by virtue of what we have all been seeing for decades, which are women being prosecuted for prostitution. And so that's how that started. And then when I went back to the DA's office and started the human trafficking division, Anna was the second prosecutor that came in. And so for years, we have spent our time talking to hundreds, if not 1,000 women who have been victims. And it's mainly women. It's also boys. It's also transgender individuals. And almost all of them are, or many of them are domestic individuals or domestic minors. And so talking to them about being in the game, which is what it's called on the streets, in human trafficking. And so when it worked out that we went into private practice, we really love the work at the criminal courthouse, which is why we are not just walking away from a messed up building, but we really love helping these individuals. And we feel like it's almost the same as a prosecutor or defense attorney. You're trying to advocate for somebody to keep them from getting into the cycle of criminal justice. And so it has spun off, not just criminal, but we're also working with a group of civil lawyers that are trying to hold businesses accountable, businesses such as Backpage, hotels, truck stops, that are profiting off of the backs of these children. And so we're really proud of the work that's happening and glad to help.
Under what laws are you, so the idea is that you have a business, an enterprise, a truck stop, a motel, or a hotel, and there are hot spots for prostitution or sex trafficking, human trafficking activities. Under what laws are you pursuing prosecuting that business in civil courts, and what remedies are available, and what relief are you seeking?
So the lawyers in the civil side that are handling those cases, Texas actually has one of the best statutes in the nation. And every time I go around, and I still train judges and speak nationally, and every time I talk about our human trafficking work in Texas, people are always like, really, Texas? You know, this came out of Texas and this reform came out of Texas? And I'm like, yeah, we're very proud of it. Texas has been strong on this issue for a long time, and there was a civil practice and remedies section that was passed that allows for the financial recovery from the businesses, just like you would talk about in the criminal context of those individuals out of a stable or a pimp that is knowingly participating and receiving a financial benefit. And so the easiest one that you can think of, just as an example, is Backpage. And that's a site that's been on the internet that it's allowed people to pay in, and in paying in, they post people online. Testimonies come out before Congress that they helped scrub ads, meaning they helped redefine it so they could try to avoid the concept that it was prostitution. But of course, everybody knows that it's prostitution. And in many circumstances, everybody knows it's young individuals or kids, which means that almost by default, they're going to be victims of human trafficking, because if you're under the age of 18, the law says that you're only caused by any means. And so it's a strict statute. And I think that this is an important movement that these civil lawyers are taking, because if the businesses realize that it's no longer profitable to allow this stuff to happen on their premises, I think you'll see a big change.
Yeah, and I think it's just, we all know, everyone knows about it. It's just a matter of you need to stop ignoring that it's happening. And I think the biggest misconception by the public is that when you talk about a human trafficking victim, you're picturing that girl on the billboard with, you know, like ponytail and just very sweet, very young, and then you're thinking like rape, chains, international victims, and that is not the case. We actually see just domestic teenagers who are runaways, who are CPS kids, and when you talk to them, you are probably not expecting them to be the victim that you have in your vision. You actually have a teenager who seems to be pretty okay with what's going on. So just to think of the fact that that same teenager is going in front of a clerk at a motel and she is showing a fake ID and she's paying cash, and that no one is actually stopping and questioning because maybe they're not recognizing it or they're just deciding not to recognize that person as a victim. I think that's the avenue that we saw when we said these kids are the ones that we need to stop ignoring, and these kids are the ones that we need to bring to light, and they do need to have some recovery out of everything that has been going on.
Yeah, and I think what you said about domestic, I mean, that to me is the big thing that I think a lot of people don't understand because, frankly, the media does a poor job getting that out there. I mean, the narrative you see in the mainstream media is that people are being brought from other countries, particularly Mexico, Central America, South America, and they're being brought up, you know, by coyotes and stuff and run up there. And that's what, if you listen to the news and you listen to the pundits, that's what they think the big problem is. But you're saying it's more domestic.
It's absolutely more domestic. I think when we were prosecutors, I'm going to say probably 95% of the cases that we prosecuted were domestic victims. And I think the media also has made this harder because the media actually, a lot of these kids, when we were at the DA's office, we have this theory of we're gonna, it's going to be an arrest for recovery, not for conviction, okay? So we do have sometimes these kiddos arrested, but then after we go through the facts of the case, we realize, yes, they are true victims, and then we're not going to arrest them, we're just recovering, we're taking them off the situation, because if it's not the criminal system, then there is no system, unfortunately, to take them away from the pimp or away from what they're going through. But then the media takes these mugshots, and then they just run these mugshots over and over and over because they just want to have the clicks and the likes, and at this point, a lot of times they're being charged with crimes. Now, after we left the office, a lot of them have been charged with serious felony cases, and they're not realizing that these kids are actually victims, and now we see them on the news over and over and over, so you don't realize that these are actually the victims that we should be advocating for. So
the media is re-victimizing these individuals who have already been through enough.
Correct.
Let me ask you something, and this is a world that not very many people are exposed to. And even me in my defense practice, I'm not particularly exposed to that much. Is there a difference, and should there be a difference between, let's say, the child who's being trafficked, and at what age does a child stop being a child, versus an individual who, some may say that, look, she's an adult, she can just leave. And is there a difference between those two, and what are they, and why does that matter?
Yeah, there is a big difference. In fact, if we can go to that one slide that has the family, juvenile, and penal code, it's a good example of kind of a short form on where the law is in Texas and where we have some conflict. So I would almost guarantee you, if you've done any kind of criminal defense, you have come in contact with a human trafficking victim. You've not known it. And so the problem is a lot of times, and I talked about the case of BW, and the record shows BW is 13. And so at the age of 13, and I have on here this example of 12, the problem that we have is you have to think about this child as both a potential juvenile offender and a child under the family code. And so that's where we got into the legal analysis, because there's that yellow line that goes across, which is showing that age of 18, and you can see underneath it, you are a victim of human trafficking if you are caused by any means. So if somebody posts your ad, if somebody drives you to the hotel, if they get you a new dress and nails and hair, they brand you with a tattoo because you're their property, and they put you out, even if you're down for it and you're willing and saying, yeah, I can make some money, and I'm getting a purse, and I'm getting to stay in a hotel and away from my parents, and I'm getting the food that I want, you're still a victim of human trafficking. And so you see that population. The conflict back there is, in Texas, you're an adult for criminal law purposes at the age of 17. So you're getting arrested at the age of 17 for prostitution, yet the family code still says that you're a child. And section 4305 and 20A.02 of the Texas Penal Code still says you're a victim of human trafficking. And so that's where we're seeing this big problem, is you have 17-year-olds that are being treated dually as victim and offender. And so that's where you have to look out for them. Over the age of 18, we're looking for things like force, threat, fraud, or coercion. And there's a slide on that has some examples with a bunch of words talking about branding, talking about seasoning. And I will say, Anna and I, when we were at the DA's office, we have seen every one of these 3 examples of force, fraud, coercion, where we're looking at promises of, hey, let's take your kids and go to Houston. We're going to have this great life. We're going to get this house together. And there's always this, there are 2 kinds of pimps. One are guerrilla pimps that will physically beat you, take you, and turn you out and rape you. The other is a finesse pimp. It's the greatest boyfriend you've ever had in your life, who loves you, is going to take care of you. And you know what? We're low on the bills. You don't mind having sex anyway. If you can just do this with this dude, just, for a couple weeks and get us out of this trouble, we'll be fine, and then we'll have enough money. And that's that cycle that starts and turns on a dime. And there was one individual we were helping. She was college educated, got into the game in her 20s, and it's like, how in the world did this happen? And she looked at me and she said, this guy's not dumb. He's just evil. And these are folks that you are coming in contact with almost on a daily basis that you don't know. And so tats, things that are on their neck, crowns, queens, things that we recognize as brands from pimps. When you start paying attention to these tattoos that are coming into the courtroom, these are individuals that have been treated as property. And they're not going to disclose.
They're the ones who are going to tell you, I'm doing it because I want to do it. But then once you start asking the right questions, and I think that's the issue that we have. When we first started with Anne, the question that you ask is not, are you a victim of human trafficking? Because the answer is always going to be no. The question is not, do you have a pimp? Because the answer is always going to be no. The question is, what's your name? Where are you from? What happened? Like, what brought you to Houston? Did you finish high school? Do you have any kids? Where's your mom? Were you CPS? Were you a runaway? When you start having that conversation with those people, you realize from the people that we interview, that I think we're up to 1,000, not once did we meet the one that was in sexual abuse as a child, the one that is really messed up in what she thinks love means, and that's why she's believing what this guy is saying. I had one, she was probably like 19 or 20, and she gave me this analogy, and she said, well, he gives me everything that I want. And when I kept pressing her, like, what do you mean he gives you everything? And then she just had it, and she goes, don't you have a bank account? Don't you have an ATM? Like, when you go to the ATM, it's the same thing for me. He's like my bank. He just keeps my money, but then whenever I ask for something, I just give it to him. He just give it to me. For them, it's just, they're not rationalizing that these people are actually using them, and they're going to tell you, I do it because I want to. And that's the one thing that when we were going to go to trial, that was the main issue that we had to convince a jury. Again, she's going to testify that she's totally fine with him. She's going to testify that he is wonderful. She's going to she's not going to be my witness. We had to bring them, we run through a lot of hoops to actually have these girls testify, and eventually they do turn around, and eventually they realize what's going on. We had one trial where girlfriend beat up by him, and she was not someone who testified for us. To this day, she's with him.
And now we've also seen a lot more, I feel like, and especially with this latest federal case with the actress, where you have women getting involved at the upper levels of some of these organizations as well.
So it's something called a stable.
Yeah.
And so this is what you'll have. Traditionally, you'll have a pimp or an exploiter, and then they have a stable. Typically, can I curse on this show?
Well,
slightly. They'll call it a bottom female, like a bottom female dog.
Gotcha.
So that's the phrase that gets used. And the bottom is actually not the bottom; they're the top.
We've had other people.
You've had other curses, show, not too bad. Well, I don't want to make it too bad, but it is a term.
I just want you to be welcome back.
Well, thank you. So it is a term of art, and so it's not my term, but it's their term,
Sure.
and it's a bottom female dog, and that is the hierarchy. And usually, that's the person that's been with them the longest. That's the person that they have often impregnated to have a child, that they have a child, that there's some pressure. And it's also the one that the pimps will beat. And so they'll have a bunch of younger girls that maybe are younger or prettier, and they'll put a beating on the bottom to send the message that, look, if you don't get in line or you don't make your quota, this is what you're going to face. And she's very much kind of a willing participant in that way. They'll also, that bottom will be the one to take the girls to the rooms. And so the way that officers need to think about this, and the way that defense lawyers need to think about this, is if the officers are not doing their job right? And if the girls get dropped off at the room and they're sitting there with a bottom, and I always say, look, if they're going in for a 15-minute date, whoever owns that property, you don't get to give freebies. So at the end of the 15 minutes, they're looking for them. And if you start having your phone ring with a typical phrase that you use for a pimp, and then they say, no, I'm sorry, that's not really a pimp, to go, oh, okay, never mind. These women will take the fall for their upper level, and they will go to prison for them. And Anna and I have seen it over and over again, even with the evidence there to say, look, we can see it. They will remain loyal. That's part of the game, loyalty, and they will take the fall for these guys. So unfortunately, I'm seeing a lot of women, and I'm seeing a whole lot of women getting charged as exploiters when maybe people don't understand. You're kind of nuts if you don't understand there's another layer to this that you're missing.
Yeah, so I mean, you've seen the case up in New York with the actress, right, who's been charged in the federal
sex
case.
Cult.
Yeah, and this sex cult where they're going out and basically recruiting girls to come in. I mean, so if you're her defense lawyer and if she is in this role and you can prove she's in that role, I mean, what do you look for psychologically? Who do you go to have these women, analyzed for what? I mean, the whole point is as a defense lawyer, if what you say is true, and these women who have now taken over some sort of leadership role have really been beaten into that role, it seems to me like you might have an argument to be made that they couldn't reasonably form the criminal intent.
So it's physical and emotional. You have to think common sense wise, and you also have to think about it, and it's the most simple thing. And the bad thing is anytime you talk about things, they'll change it, but they have to communicate with one another. So if you want to figure out a way to find it, you can traditionally track back and find some things. You also look for signs. These pimps or the people that are working them, they're smart. So things that we would see is these guys always brag. They're on social media. They want to recruit more individuals. They'll have fancy, fancy cars that they've gotten the girls to go out and put in their name, and that also adds the financial incentive. If you don't keep paying off this vehicle, well, now you have people coming after you for money. When people would prosecute these women, you've made it worse for them because now they can't really get a real good job, and now they definitely need a pimp. Branding, the tattoos, other things that you would look for. The other thing to keep in mind as a defense attorney, not just in that circumstance, but in Texas has required TDCJ to tell individuals leaving prison that if you committed any offense of which you're a victim of human trafficking, well, you should turn around and seek a pardon. And I think we ought to flip it. I think we ought to be looking on the front end that if you have these women that are UUMB because they've taken the John's car because the pimp has told them to, if you have them in the hotel room where they're the bait for the guys to get brought into the room and then guys jump in and it's an aggravated robbery, we ought to start looking at them that way and recognizing they are the bait. I mean, we're talking about the thing on the lure that hooks the fish, and then you go after them and charge them for ag rob. So defense attorneys need to realize that challenge, that it's not a technical defense, but we sure think it's something people need to consider on whether or not you want to convict them.
You're going after state of mind.
Yeah,
that's a true state of mind where your mind has been altered.
And I think if you, as a defense attorney, what you need to do is, like Ann said, look for the tattoos. That's the first thing. You're going to see loyalty, queen, king, always, pretty much,
Unusual piercings
Unusual
on the face.
piercings, yes. And then if you check their criminal history, you're going to see a lot of trespass charges, prostitution convictions, drug convictions, of course, UUMVs, unlawful use of motor vehicle. And then if you start looking at the bonds that were posted on those cases, and that's what we used to do when we were at the DA's office. We had this big chart where I have a girl charged with prostitution second prostitution, and then she has all this criminal history. I will pull up all the bonds, and sure enough, the addresses are going to be the same. The friends who are posting are going to be the same. So as a defense attorney, you need to check, because she may not be telling you. That's the thing. As a defense attorney, your challenge is that she may not be willing to tell you anything until you confront her with that information, and you tell her, like, well, I have this guy posting your bond every single time you get arrested. Tell me what's going on with that person and who that person is. And they will come up with all the excuses like, oh, that is just a coincidence. That was just a neighbor of a friend who maybe just heard about me. And then you start going down that track. And I think you build that state of mind, like you said.
And it's as simple as when you're a defense attorney and you say, hey, this is your wreck, and before they'll answer you, they call somebody on the phone. You know, when people are calling the court to say, hey, what happened to them and when are they getting out? And things are a little different now because of the bonding situation and what we're doing with things, but you can still see that this person's not making their own decisions.
Well, and the sad thing is, I mean, I can't believe TDC is telling people to apply for a pardon. I mean,
Right. And who's going to do that?
well, who's going to do it? And do they?
And I think the
A pardon
issue
in
is,
Texas, I mean, you're just not going to get it.
I think
do
the
rates.
issue is the Texas legislature has realized we have screwed this up for a long time.
Yeah.
And we have convicted a lot of victims of human trafficking.
Well,
and we want to try to find a way to make it right. But the reality is these women don't know that this is there for them. So Anna and I have also done writs for women where either the defense didn't exist at the time or it wasn't looked into. And we've done the same thing we did when we were prosecutors. We built a case to legitimately corroborate and show that this was a victim of human trafficking. And but for that, they wouldn't have been convicted of the charge that they were convicted of.
Well, and it's one thing to go do 6 months in county jail here, or even do, 2 years in state jail or TDC. I mean, if you get wrapped up like what this actress got wrapped up in, and you get charged in a federal situation, you're looking at decades.
Not just that, but
and there is no parole.
And in Texas, if you are, so let's say you're a 17-year-old kid, right? And you're a victim of human trafficking. And the problem that when you're 17, like we saw that red and white blocks, you're not really going to go to CPS because it's hard for them to place you. You don't have the ability to rent an apartment or rent a hotel because you're not 18, so you're not an adult.
Yeah.
And you're in this wasteland where you're stuck on the streets. And so it's called survival sex. And so then when you're 17, you're on the street and you get in with a stable, and one of the other individuals in that stable is technically under the age of 18 or 14 or 15, well, then you're potentially looking at being charged with compelling prostitution of a minor. That's 5 to 99 or life, and you got to register for life as a sex offender. And these kids don't realize, and oftentimes when they're not jumping up and down screaming and saying, wait a minute, I am a victim, they're not being seen as a victim, and they have no idea how to advocate for themselves, and they often feel responsible. They feel like, I screwed up, I'm a troubled kid, I'm nothing but a bad actor, they were sexually abused as a kid, and they really have a hard time standing up for themselves. And so a lot of times you're having to do it for them.
Dovetailing on that, earlier we talked about how, Anna, you'd approach and discuss the circumstance and scenarios with an adult. Do you approach the individual differently if there are a child, and how?
Well, with the child, you need to make them trust you. They have a lot of trust issues. So one of the things that we encounter with the kiddos when we were prosecutors is the first time is never going to be an answer, and you should not give up. You're going to visit that child 3-4 times before she even opens up about, like, hey, I don't know, like my favorite fruit is an apple. They may not just communicate with you. And I think that is frustrating for the prosecutor and for the defense attorney, because sometimes you just want to move the docket and you just want to be done with the case, and she's not saying anything. Prosecutor's like, well, I don't have anything else. But sometimes, like, resetting the case is worth doing it. We're not going anywhere with this interview today. Okay, you don't want to talk to me today? Fine, I'll see you next time. We had that with the girls that we charge, and I will tell them, at some point I had an inkling that they were victims of human trafficking. I couldn't corroborate that. We will dismiss them based on that inkling that we had, because we didn't want to convict those people. And then I will tell them, I will see you next time, because I'm still the prosecutor and I'm still covering this court. And sure enough, 2 months later, she's on the docket. She'll pop on my docket and we'll go and we'll talk again.
But see, I mean, you had the advantage in that you kind of had the training to know the signs. And the problem is, I think, 95% of prosecutors in that office don't know what to look for.
Correct.
And so, it seems to me like, aside from the legislative problem, there seems to be a training problem within prosecutors' offices as well as to what to look for the signs.
Yeah, so we, Anna and I still train. And in fact, I've done trainings for TDCAA. I still do the judicial trainings for the state judges. And I always tell people, I'm happy to talk to anybody, any group that asks us. I've got, just like these slides that you're seeing, I've got a presentation that I do, and I will do it because it's really important that people just have the information. And you're right. I've seen a lot of folks that just don't know yet. And they'll eventually get up to speed. And that's the thing. I don't want to fault anybody that just doesn't know what we know. And part of the reason they don't know what we know is they've not been working with this population for a decade. And so I get that.
Frankly, until y'all came on tonight, I didn't know a lot of this stuff either. I mean, my experience has been a handful of trafficking cases where I've represented the male. And like I said, before, I knew nothing because all of those cases that I had, they were international cases where they were bringing people up from Central and South America and using coyotes, and it was ugly stuff. I mean, violence and.
And you're talking about state or federal?
Federal.
Okay.
And so my experience in terms of looking at how the females were treated who became part of the upper level management, so to speak, in this whole deal. I mean, I really. Like I said, my experience was limited to representing the males who were running girls up internationally.
As defense attorneys, I will say for state cases, things like assault family violence, they always get the wrong charge. If you have someone who's, like say on assault family violence, if you read the summary of the probable cause statement, and you see someone who's boyfriend and girlfriend, but then the place of the offense is actually a hotel, and then you see that their dispute started about money, then that should be a red flag for you already. So it's boyfriend and girlfriend, but they're at a hotel or motel, and then they're talking about money. That should be something that should be asking whoever got charged in that situation, or if you have that complainant as a prosecutor, that should be a red flag for you. That complainant is just not a complainant on an assault family violence case. Most likely this person may be a potential victim of human trafficking.
Wow.
Or when you have a guy and there's a bunch of women in the car and there's drugs found and one of the girls says, oh, it's mine. And it's like, she took the case. And we hear that all the time. Like, I took the case for that guy. And yeah, you see these girls that take a lot of cases.
And the law allows for a pardon for them.
Well, they say seek a pardon. And so what Anna and I have done in appropriate circumstances is try to go back to the judge on a writ. And in that circumstance, we worked with the prosecutor and said, look, nobody realized this at the time or found this information. We were able to find it. And this is another thing that we did as prosecutors, and we do the same thing now. We look for corroborating information because inevitably, if somebody is a victim of human trafficking, I guarantee you they will lie to you about something at some point. And so you have to be able to filter through where are they lying and it makes sense, and where can I corroborate the information that will truthfully show that they're a victim of human trafficking. And so that's like the circumstance of BW. The first thing that she did when she came in contact with law enforcement was lie about her age. And that's because oftentimes pimps train them to do it. The problem back then was people would go, well, that's just a lying kid. Well, I can't believe anything else they say. But then once you realize that this population is trained to be combative with you, to lie to you, and to really make officers angry. And so it's also training law enforcement to know it's like walking up on a sick kid. And when you see the kid coughing and throwing up, you gotta not say, oh my God, I gotta get away from that. You gotta realize that's a symptom of something else. And so the most challenging, they're the most challenging witnesses and the most challenging clients. And we see them today in doing misdemeanor cases where we know, look, this is a victim of human trafficking. And we try to get them, you try to help them. And until they want help, and we don't have a means to make them do it, we just try to help them. But until they see their victimization, it's really hard.
Two things. So, number one, it's, I guess maybe in this country, and people just don't want to really see it or admit it, is human trafficking for children really that big of a deal? Is it really out there as much as, as much as it appears to be? And two, these kids are actually getting prosecuted, like 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds, they're actually getting prosecuted. And when they get prosecuted and end up in the juvenile system, Are they getting released on any pretrial conditions? And if so, how?
So yes and yes and yes. So years ago after BW and the Supreme Court said, look, stop prosecuting these kids. CPS is supposed to take them. And the reality is at that time they said, hey, CPS, take them. And what do you think CPS said? We can't do this. We can barely keep kids we have.
We don't want it. It's not our problem.
Well, and the legislature was not giving them any funding at the time to say, go help them. And so what happened was they then shoved this population back into juvenile justice and took it from delinquent conduct to a CHINS, which is the juvenile
Child in
phrase.
need of supervision.
Yeah, child indicating need for supervision. And so they put them back in there, but that creates a whole other can of worms. One of the things that Harris County did, which Judge Snyder and Judge Angela Ellis did, and I think in probation, they deserve a huge amount of credit. They created a court that is now called Care Court. And it was an alternative program put in place for these kids because these kids need medical attention, they need trauma attention, they need a place to stay almost immediately. And so they created that court. And when they created it, it was like, no big deal, we can do this because, we'll just have a handful of kids. Well, of course, once juvenile probation changed the intake question and started asking children other questions, they were flooded and they had hundreds. And so since you had Senate Bill 92 passed a couple of sessions ago requiring every other county to try to duplicate Care Court. And unfortunately, there wasn't much funding that came with that either. And so the problem is you created a disincentive to identify the population, because if you identify them, then you're supposed to create this alternative court for them. Mm-hmm. I will tell you here, we've had hundreds, and you do see these kids that are arrested. And oftentimes you'll see them arrested for other charges, but they're identified as human trafficking victims and they're put in this program. And part of that reason is because so many of these kids are runners. And so when they are just with CPS or foster care, they often take off. They're on the streets and then they're just continually victimized and traumatized over and over again. And so I think you see this very genuine conflict between what the legislature is trying to do and the courts are trying to do to find secure placement, where you can at least provide some services, but the problem is these kids still feel incarcerated, and you can understand that. And so Texas has not figured this out yet. We don't have placement beds. We don't have places where we can put these kids, and it's something that we continue to struggle with. We've been having this conversation for a decade, and we're still having it.
How much resistance do y'all get when you go into a courtroom representing somebody who's been charged that is? I mean, how much of a fight is it with the prosecutor in that court to convince them of this and that it is a legitimate issue?
I think these days is a real challenge because they don't know what we know.
Yeah.
And then as defense attorneys, I think the advantage that we had as prosecutors is we had the knowledge and then we had the power to do whatever we thought was just. Now we only have the hope that they see, and sometimes, like I said, sometimes I will dismiss cases based on that inkling that I know there's something going on and I just don't feel right convicting this person. Mm-hmm. These days, if you combine and say like, I can only tell you she's a victim of human trafficking, and I'm not going to let you talk to her at this point because you don't know what I know. And yeah. I just don't want you to, like before we will interview them, and then if they tell me that they did drugs, that they got someone else's car, all of those things, I'm not going to charge anyone. I don't think anyone can say that we actually charge anyone after an interview, even though there were things that were going on that could be potential crimes. I think right now it's really hard because people are just starting to learn what exactly is that we see when we see that victim of human trafficking. And that's the other thing. Like one of the main things that was a struggle for me was to make people understand. They're like, oh, we'll offer you this pretrial diversion program. In my mind, it's just an oxymoron. You cannot offer an alternative prosecution when someone should not be prosecuted. It's just like someone being charged with murder, having a self-defense claim. Everyone sees the self-defense claim, and they said, but we'll give you a pretrial diversion. I'm not going to give you TDC. No, you cannot give them pretrial diversion. They have a self-defense claim, and therefore, we're not going to prosecute them. So, when we had the court that we had, Safe Court back then, people just did not understand. And then once we left the office, they were offering, like for the Super Bowl, that was the main thing that they were saying, we're just going to offer these alternative pretrial diversion to all those girls that are going to be brought for the Super Bowl. It was just heartbroken for me to say, what do you mean you're offering them a pretrial diversion if you're saying that they're being brought and you know you're describing exactly what you should not be prosecuting for. So I think as defense attorneys, we do face that challenge of it's hard for us to convey that message and be respectful of the work that they're trying to do at the same time.
Have you guys ever tried a case using these theories? Have
Not
you ever
yet.
taken it in front of a jury?
Not yet.
As defense attorneys?
Yeah.
Not as.
Yeah, as
not
defense attorneys, we will soon.
Yeah.
I believe it. I believe it.
I would love to come watch it when y'all do, because I'm really now that I understand.
And
this.
it's hard. And another thing that we thought about as prosecutors is, can I put the victim through this? And so it's a huge risk, because when you're talking about the hammer of how is somebody gonna treat this individual who's a victim of human trafficking, but is involved in this world that, depending on whether or not they understand the explanation or not,
Right.
and
can
you're
really put 'em on the stand?
you're re-victimizing them.
Yeah.
Because it's not like so this is another reason that pimps get into human trafficking. If somebody's selling a drug and you get a drug, you can collect that drug, put it in a locker, and you can make sure it shows up for trial. When you're talking about the manipulation of a human and the stress that's put on that human by that pimp to take the fall or whatever else for them, I mean, there's no guarantee that they're going to want to save themselves and that they're going to come forward or do what is needed to do. And so we've seen it as both prosecutors, defense attorneys, when the phone rings, when that person shows up, when they start crying or whatever else, that level of manipulation. Think about a bad breakup.
Yeah.
And we're just talking about normal relationships, right? And you kind of are torn over it and everything else. You're talking about this crazy relationship where somebody will go have sex with somebody else and give you the money. I mean, that's just, none of us would say, okay, that's okay. These are individuals that are completely emotionally torn, and they are property. They are tied to another human. And so that's a huge risk, and we worry about that.
What can we as a community do to prevent these things and to combat these things as just a group of people who obviously don't want, need, and have no sex trafficking, human trafficking has no place in a normal functioning society. What are these things that we can do as a community?
So do y'all remember Lifesaver soda?
I put Lifesavers in sodas.
Do you remember the actual bottle of Lifesaver soda?
Yes.
So-
I do now that you say that.
That's one of the biggest corporate flops, that and New Coke. It tested very well, and then when the product came out, nobody wanted to buy it.
Right.
And that's why most of all your viewers will have no idea about Lifesaver soda. And so one of the ways that you stop this is the demand. And so you hear like sports radio and people will talk about some of the tracks like, oh, it's no big deal, where you just go on Backpage and get a girl because my wife doesn't want to do this with me anymore. You're fueling the human trafficking industry. If you're not putting money into it, there's nobody that's going to sell girls. And so that's one big part, is the demand. The other thing is the Children's Assessment Center recognizes 90% of victims of human trafficking were victims of child abuse. And so I often say, with where we are in the criminal justice system, we're like that back fence at a t-ball game. By the time the ball hits us, it's missed so many other steps that it was supposed to have. And so child abuse is a huge component. If we're taking care of people that are victimized early, giving them the strength, the confidence, the trust to know that they didn't deserve to have their neighbor come in and have sex with them, that they were not wrong in that sense, I think you can help a lot of kids that would turn to it.
Yeah, I will say as society, and I'm not a feminist at heart, but I think when it comes to this issue, I think you guys have a lot to do with it. It's not a joke, it's not okay. Right. It's just everyone, and we see it in the courthouse, whenever you have someone who's charged as a John, then it's like no big deal. And I remember as a prosecutor, the defense attorney will come and like their best defense on this guy or mitigation evidence is like, well, he's married and he has kids. And in my mind, I'm like, don't even tell me he's married, because now I'm even more furious. That's wife no, because actually you're gonna go back, and then you're ruining this family, and then you're gonna put it on me, the prosecutor, because your guy is the John. Well, it was an undercover officer. Yeah, this time was an undercover officer. It's like the assault family violence. We know that person called 911. It wasn't the first time that it happened. The first time that the John is caught, don't tell me you have the ability to go on Backpage, rent a motel, do all of these things for the first time, and you just happen to have the undercover officer. So I think we just not normalize that conduct from the demand side. That really, if we stop the joking, if we stop the, it's just a John, and it's just, wife wasn't doing it, and it's no big deal, and he didn't know she was a minor. Well, of course he didn't know. When we got the chance to interview Johns, because we also did that, when you really bring me someone who's repented and really says, hey, I don't know, we will tell them, like, did you know you were texting with the pimp? Because when you're getting all horny and all happy because you're gonna go have sex with this girl, the ones in all these hot sex messages, it's the guy, like that you may not think is going to be the girl who's going to show up in your motel.
I honestly, I hear what you're saying. I don't think a lot of guys, the majority of guys, think that far ahead. I really don't. I just think a lot of them don't think that they are texting with a pimp and that there's this whole underworld of things. A lot of these guys are, they're just, and I'm not trying to make an excuse for them.
No,
but I do think that there are some who clearly know what they're doing, and they know the whole environment, and they're like, screw it, I'm good. I'm going in there anyway. But I do think that there are guys who just, and I'm not saying it's their first time, their fifth time or whatever. I just think that some of them are honestly so oblivious to what is actually
happening, and I think that's why we.
So I think it's more of an education.
Education thing.
Because I will say, like, I had a client that I represented who was an executive. I don't think he really truly understand. A lot of these guys, you got to understand, a lot of these guys were in the military, they serve overseas. It's no big deal, to go in a foreign country, especially over.
Sure, just go get the foreign girls. Who cares about the foreign girls?
But that's what I'm saying. That's the mindset, and so they get back here, and he actually called me the other day and said, I went through the class, I did everything, and he goes, that was the most eye-opening thing to me ever. He goes, I wish I had known all this before. And because what he had done, it was a true education class for him. He really honestly did not know about all the stuff, and he was required to take one of these educational courses as part of his deferred deal. And so I think it literally was an eye-opening experience for him to go through that. So I think people like you getting out there and educating people about what the background is actually would help.
That's why we will always say yes and help people, help with the public awareness, help with the legal awareness. Same thing, if lawyers from any side have a question, we always answer. Whoever calls from wherever they call, if they say, hey, will you talk to me about this? We both always say, I'm happy to help you. I want you to understand the law. I want you to understand the dynamics. And it's complicated. So I think this is as tricky. It's like playing that game Minesweeper. You move over here, the fact pattern changes.
Man, you've thrown out Lifesaver.
I know, it's like old school, right?
Minesweeper.
I'm dating myself on my age.
You're putting me right there with you.
I know. Sorry, Jimmy.
I was just like, we were talking about stuff the other day, and I was like, oh man, I feel
getting old
on this stuff. But that's all the time we got.
What?
There we go.
The hour is done, ladies.
See?
Time flies when you're having fun, especially when you're getting educated.
Thank you, guys.
No,
Thank
we
you for having
appreciate
us.
y'all coming on. Ann Johnson, Ana Martinez. We appreciate these ladies joining us and educating me for sure, and I hope educating y'all. And hopefully they educated Julio. That might be a little bit of a big mountain to climb.
Have I been here?
I don't know. Have you?
No, thank you. It's wonderful. It's a great show, I feel.
Absolutely. But that's all the time we have for tonight, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next week with another new episode of Reasonable Doubt. Good night.